Start. Okay, so just so I know who came here for it, who all came here for the Node stuff. Learning how to split up a Node app. Okay, those three. Anyone else who wasn't here originally for that but wanted to ask questions, feel free to blurt them out. I'll try to cover them. First of all, I have a Node repo that you can go to, fork, download, run npm start on so that you can try it out yourself. I would tell you where to go for it, but honestly it's easiest if I just select it out. If you go to the Climb Night Provo Slack channel on the DevMountain team, you should be able to see the link that I posted there. It doesn't have a readme yet, so I'll be adding that later. In any case, while you're doing that, I'll just explain a little bit about this. One of the difficult things for me to see when I am a mentor and looking at people's Node apps is the fact that they're all stuck in one file, everything. And it works if it's a tiny app, but as soon as it gets bigger in any way, it becomes very, very difficult to keep the app going and to understand where things are happening, as well as to make sure that all of your functionality is in one spot rather than elsewhere. There's a lot that goes into this, and a lot of what I am actually going to be showing is some of the practices that I've started to use. You don't necessarily have to do it exactly the way that I show tonight, but it to me is a recommended way to do it, and so that it's easier to deal with that in your applications. So, I just want to see if everyone has gone to there, or if everyone who wants to go there has gone there already. I'll just continue. I'll just get going. So when you get to there, first thing I want you to do is, once you've cloned it to your computer, to run npm I. Once you're in the folder, of course. This will allow you to have all of the dependencies that I've required up here, and so that you can have it there and everything should be good. Oops. Okay. So, as you can see here, we have this server.js file. It's not huge, but you can see that it's kind of falling off the page, and then we have different sections that are kind of running into each other. Like, for instance, we have everything being brought in up here. We have our app creation. We have this random DB variable, really confusing. What's up with that? We have app.use with all of them, so we have all of the middlewares that are being done right here. Then we're serving up the files. Then we're connecting to Massive. Then we are defining our routes for a bunch of different random little things. And then we finally get to the point where we're listening to our application, and we're looking for connections. Again, this will work, and because of the nature of JavaScript, you can really put all of your functionality in one file if you want, which you probably can see with Webpack. But the thing is that at this point, it's not really that helpful to us. We want to be able to separate these concerns, and so that we can go to places, to specific files to do specific things with the application. It helps us to keep things clean and stuff like that.
So what's Chalk?
What does Chalk do? Chalk is an NPM package that basically, in this case, You see that I've console logged the result of chalk green doing whatever that there is there, and chalk cyan doing whatever that is there. If I actually open up my terminal and let me go ahead and run that, node server.js. Node will run the file and give it a moment. Boom. What it's doing in this case, and don't worry too much about the rest of that, the app running and listening at localhost 8084, it's just a way for me to feel nice about it, make it look pretty, change it from a normal default whitish gray to be something that is a little more engaging.
Is that just for stuff on the console?
That is just for stuff on the console. Unfortunately, it only works if you're doing stuff in the terminal, so the browser won't do any good in the browser. You can style the stuff in the browser separately, but that's something for another time. Well, anyway. So, by the way, this connection string, that's what it was having troubles with, is that it didn't connect right, and that's because I probably didn't type that out right, but I don't really care at this point. So, in any case, this is very confusing. It's difficult to read, it's difficult to go through and debug, it's kind of disorienting when you are a little bit further down because you're like, what in the world is happening here? So, let's start with breaking up this application by, it's this one. By going to our server folder, create a new folder, first of all. Let's call this one config. The reason why we want to do config is because there are a few things in here that probably shouldn't just sit randomly in our code. For instance, this in particular is probably not a really good thing to have in your repos, especially if they are open repos. Because this basically says that this is the string that we're going to be using to hide or to hash our session, and so that people can't just decode it and do something with the session and impersonate users and stuff like that. So secrets really aren't a good idea to keep inside of a server.js file because it's difficult to hide. As such, if you put it in a different file, it's something that you can ignore with Git, and so that it doesn't even enter into the server. And you can have a separate configuration between production server as well as a development server. So let's create one here that's just called config.js. Excuse me. So in our config.js, let's create a secret because that's what we wanted to hide in this main section. So we do a const secret, and we're going to give it the value of whatever we had here. And paste it here. After that, we are going to module.export the secret. And from there, what we can do is we can bring in the secret from the config. Here I'm just structuring the secret out of that because I don't really care about the rest of the object that we're given, we just want the secret. And what we can do from there is, since secret is the exact same thing between or is the exact same variable name in this object, literal, as we have for a variable. I'm just going to nuke the rest of that because JavaScript will know that that's what I'm trying to do.
Sorry, are you gonna do ES? Are you gonna do ES6 or
ES6 syntax? Yeah. Because I'm using JavaScript itself, just the default JavaScript, I can't do that. I was debating on whether or not I'd do it in TypeScript, but I figured more people would understand the JavaScript than ES6. Afterwards, I can go over the ES6 version.
You did give us that.
The whole, yeah, I did give that snippet out in TypeScript, or ES6, basically. So for now, I'll just do this, and then I'll get to that a little bit later. So that's great. Now we have a file that we can put our configuration in. Technically, we would also probably want some of this perhaps in a different file, because especially right now, it has a username and a password, which typically probably isn't really that great of a thing to keep in a file here. So what we can do is we can also take this, remove it, put it into this file, as I'm just going to call it DB connection string. And just for good measure, I'm going to put it in alphabetical order. Then what we can do is we can grab this DB connection string from that and stick it right in here, DB connection string. That allows us to also have a different string potentially for production as well. Plus, it helps us to not have to refer to the password each time we need it, and username. So that's great. Now we have some of the more sensitive details out of our server.js, and we're bringing them into it in a different place. But we can go a little bit further, more particularly, I personally don't really care for all of this middleware to be just sitting there. It's kind of a little bit more than I really care to know about most of the time, especially in my server.js. And in my server.js, I personally like to only have the creation of the application, and then I defer things to other files, as well as once it gets to it, I only like the app.listen in there because usually that's kind of what I'm looking for when I'm looking at server.js to see what port I'm listening to and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to server folder again, create a new folder called middleware, and inside of that folder I'm going to add a file that personally I like to call it decorator.middleware.js. You don't really have to call it decorator, but basically the idea about decorators and decorating in JavaScript or in general programming thing is that it takes something and adds a little bit more to it. And since we're technically with the middleware, we're taking the original application and we're adding the middleware to it, it seems to make sense in my mind.
So you're saying like the middleware is the decorator?
Well, yeah. Basically, what this does is it decorates the application with middleware. So, for instance, all of this right here, I can grab and stick in here. Now, since this is a Node application, variables are scoped only inside of modules, which in this case, app only exists in this folder. It's not like the browser where there's the window object and everything is automatically assigned to it, which is really annoying in some cases. And as such, we don't have any handle on this app. So to fix this, what I typically do is I create a function that I call decorate, because it will decorate the application. And just for good measure, in case we want to change something off of this, we can just return the app. Now, decorate accepts one parameter, at least for now, and that's going to be the app. Let's see. Now, in this file, we had references to all of these different middlewares. And you know that now we don't have it in here, we should probably bring it over. So I'm going to grab all of these, yoink them out, stick them here, and we should be good to go on that. In order to make it available to our server file, the module.exports it. Actually, in fact, we're not even going to do an equals an object, we're just going to send it back as decorate. Oops. So that allows us to have that decorate function be the export of the file. And in here, what we can do then is we can, first of all, grab the decorate function, middleware / decorator middleware, and just by convention and because of the fact that it's kind of a little bit confusing, especially in the tabs for VS Code, is that it doesn't tell you the path to the file. But it does show like decorator.middleware.js. If you just so happen to have another decorator file in your project, it gets really confusing because if you don't have any other decorator file, you expect that it's a different decorator file than it really is. So I do a .middleware to make sure that this is a middleware decorator, and that's it. Anyway, so now we have the decorate function here. And just like we had in this file, it takes the app. So decorate, nope, no, thank you. Takes app, which at least as far as JavaScript is concerned could be anything. But in this case, since we have an app, we can just pass that in. And one other thing that we will have to do is, because we don't have any reference to a secret in this file anymore, we want to grab that out of there. And since we're using it in here, we're going to use it there, but let's grab this. Don't worry about it. Const require config. Now with that, we have the ability to use that secret without needing to really worry too much about that, and we're good to go there. Okay, so this should still work basically the same way. The reason why perhaps we don't need to use or like do something like, for instance, app receives decorate app is because app is an object. It's already decorated with those middlewares. So you don't have to really worry about reassigning it to anything or anything like that. And therefore, we should be good to go with that. So middleware's been taken out. We don't have to worry about that for now. And next thing that we come to, I'll get to this in a moment. Next thing we get to is this massive connection. If you don't use massive, this is for Postgres. It's just a driver for JavaScript, a lean driver for JavaScript to interface with. Massive. in this case, honestly, I don't really care for having database-related stuff in my main server. Reason for it is it, again, still clutters things up, but plus, if you ever want to use that, then either you have to do some really annoying things, or use that later. Either you have to do some really annoying things, like I see it's done by default in DevMountain, which is the app.set db, and then it passes in the db instance. I don't really like that because, for one, it's not very elegant, it's not very easy to read, and it's, I don't know, I find it more annoying than it's worth. As such,
That does the same thing right here.
What we have right now, since we have everything in the same file, this db variable is available to everything in the file. And so technically we can use that db inside of any of these routes, but we're not going to keep the routes in the same file either, so we really shouldn't be doing anything with that. As such, let's start to take some of this db related stuff out. We don't want it here, we should use it elsewhere. So, back to the server folder, I'm going to create another folder called database, or actually, what I actually prefer recently more than anything is that I just create another file in the config, that is database.js, or since we're using massive.config.js. Again, config, because that way if there's any other massive JavaScript file, it'll be different. So, let's first of all grab massive. And with massive, we're going to grab this, and bring it in here. Now we have massive, we don't have db connection string at the moment, so let's grab that. Oh my gosh, I'm so used to ES6 imports, so I was about to do something really weird there. And actually no, it's in the same folder, config.js. So we can grab the db connection string from config. So now we have that. Now we also want to create the db variable here, and module.exports, we're going to create that. Now also usually when I get to this point when creating a server, it becomes apparent to me that we don't want to just simply give db right here, because when this first runs, db becomes undefined and it's never reassigned. As such, this isn't a really great thing for us, and we could do something like do const massive connection receives an object, and have that be db, and then when this comes in we can just do massive connection.db becomes that, and then we would want to export the entire massive connection. But I don't really like that too much for a couple of reasons, because A, you just have one property on this object, on the massive db or massive connection object, and it becomes a little bit more unwieldy to do stuff with. So typically what I do instead is I create a function called getDBInstance, which doesn't take anything, but what it will do is it will first of all check if db is defined, which currently it's undefined, so if it's undefined then it's going to be a problem. And just for now, I'm going to throw an error that is going to say DB has not connected. You can do other ways of handling that, but for now, I'm not really too worried about it. And since throw will stop the function where it is, I don't have to worry about an else statement either, so I can just return DB. That way, whenever you invoke getDB instance, it will return the DB if it is there yet. If it's not, then you will probably want to not do anything with that. But in the module.exports, we can send back getDB instance so that we can access it from elsewhere. Actually, right now, with the DB configuration, we actually we're not going to be using it quite yet because the place in this file that we would be using it, these routes are going to be brought to different files, so we don't want to even deal with that right now. Okay.
What did you just delete?
What did I just delete?
The DB connection string.
I deleted the massive DB connection string.then, the import of the DB connection string, as well as the let DB. So, because none of that actually applies here, we can take that out. In fact, we can even get rid of this too. All of that is out of there. We don't have to even think about it again in this file. So, now that we have massive out of there, I want to talk about the rest of these, all the way up to here. Routing is a little bit of a different situation in a Node.js app, especially an Express app, is what I mean. I personally do a different thing than just do an app.use express.static with the underscore dir named to public, because when serving single-page applications, you need to always serve the index.html if it can't find a file. Why? Because in the index.html, all of your code comes in, and the router is then able to look at the path in the browser, and then it's able to do something with it. If we're doing it this way, then it's going to cause us problems if we want to try to do a non-hashbang routing, because hashbang is just gross. I hate hashbang routing. If I can avoid it, I will get rid of it, which means I will do it every single time. Anyway, either way, let's grab these routers, or these routes, and put them in a different place. So, in your server folder, let's create another folder called routers. And just because there's going to be lots of routers, well, actually there's only going to be one file that we'll really be doing anything with. I'm not going to worry about what I was just about to say. Anyway, in the routers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file that I will call delegate, or delegator.router.js. Reason why? Because this router is going to take care of all of our routing in the entire application. It's going to be able to help us to break down our API into smaller pieces, and we are going to be talking a little bit more about routing in general in an Express application. I'll show you some really neat things that are going to come from it. So first,
when you say the whole application, are you referring like to the back end?
The whole back-end application.
Okay. So not like you're not talking about React, like.
No. You can technically use React in the back end, but it doesn't really make as much sense as Node.
Yeah.
Basically, what I mean by this is that I'm splitting up a Node application. Technically, this could actually be not necessarily a server, but it could be a CLI, or it could be something else. I'm just using an Express app because people should be familiar with that usually. Anyway, so in this delegator.router.js, I'm going to create a function that's going to be called delegate. And again, because I want to delegate the routes, I can also say delegate routes. And then just like we were doing with the middleware decorator, we're going to add an app because we don't have a current handle on the app. I'll explain a little bit more why we're doing a function here rather than what we're going to be doing with routers. And module.exports, and we're just going to receive delegate routes. And then at the very beginning, I'm going to grab all of that, and I'm going to stick it in delegate routes, and just for fun, we're going to return app. Again, if we want to chain anything off of this, we can. Most of the time I don't, but that doesn't really matter to me. Anyway. Next we're going to grab the delegate function from routers, delegator.router.js. So, just like we were doing with decorate, we're going to call delegate app, and that will allow it to go through that function. So now when we look at this file, the server.js file, we have a few things a little bit nicer to see now. First of all, we have only express and choc that are coming in, two things that really are the only things that we ever use in this file. The choc in order to make things look pretty, and the express to create the app. We then grab the decorate and delegate functions to decorate the app with middleware. You can also call this decorate with middleware if you really want to. Doesn't really matter, just whatever you prefer. Or delegate to routes. Something like that. The reason why I don't necessarily just call it router is because we're going to be getting into a little bit more what you can do with express routing. Something that is a very well kept but not necessarily secret. So if we go back to the delegate, or to the delegate routes function, we still can split this up into two different parts. Up here, we have files being served. Down here, we have the API being called. We don't want to have both of these in the same place because that helps us to be able to do things, be a little bit more flexible with it. So in our routers folder, let's actually pull this out and create a new file called api.router.js. In the routers folder. Because it's a router, we're going to put it in the routers folder. So, in this folder, we're going to do something fancy with the express router. Let's const express receives requiring express. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a router, API router, receives express dot capital R router. This is a factory function that creates a new router and gives it to you that way. So what we can do, and let's just module dot exports the API router, just for good measure. What we can do, if you notice here, is we can actually use very similar methods to our original Express app, such as api.all or app.use, so you can have middleware for a router rather than just everything. Get, post, patch, put, and delete. You can do basically everything that you could do with the app.route thingy with this. And in all technicality, your application is one giant router. But in any case, we don't want to necessarily keep everything in that router. So let's quickly stick all of this in there. Minus that, we don't want that. And instead of the app.get, let's take all of these and turn it into API router. Then you can get, post, put, patch, delete any of those right here. And this allows us to be able to have everything in the API router, which can be really useful. So what we will want to do in our delegator, now that we don't want any of that in there, is we can get it up here, API router, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically pretend that this is middleware, but we're also going to restrict it to a certain path. So in this case, app.use, and we're going to say API, and we're going to use API router. Reason, and why I suggest this. This allows you to interact with your backend API using every path to your API prefixed with API. That helps you to separate concerns. Like for instance, if we had an auth router that dealt with registering a user and logging users in and stuff like that, we can also do app.use auth router. This will break because that doesn't exist, but either way, you get the idea. So yeah, it's very useful that way, plus then that way, if you ever need any specific middleware for the auth routes, you can put that in there. Or the API routes, you can do that. And more particularly, the reason why I like this is because that allows us to catch errors. The asterisk is there to say, I want this to be the case for all routes, as long as they have not been caught by any of these up here. I want all of them to do this. And for instance, in this case, I'll just grab chalk up here. So that I can log out to the console. Chalk.red. This didn't work. And I'm going to I'm going to make sure that that's fixed. Not that. That did not work either. Excuse me. And then what we can do at that point is res.status 44, not 440, 404, and then .send a custom error object back to the front end saying this, or message, this resource doesn't exist. And that way, and just for good measure, success, false. That way we can then have custom error messages just for the error 404, just for that. This is in particular important because what I'm going to be doing next with the files is going to also upset the balance with the 404 that comes by default through Express. As you can see with our router delegator, we still are doing file routing this way. And especially if we want to do a single page application without the hashbang, this is not going to work at all. So let's create another router in the routers folder called file.router.js. This one's not going to be set up quite like the API router because of the fact that when I tried it with a router, with a different router, it didn't work. So for that reason, we're going to do it this way. Router. Okay. Now let's grab this. And for instance, if we wanted to grab something from Node modules, what we want to do is we want to restrict this use to only Node modules. And instead of going back to public, we're going to go to Node modules. Since we also put this in a folder deeper into the file structure, we also need to put in another ... And I've also noticed that there can be some difficulty with extra redirects. So we're going to do redirect false. And that's going to fit inside of express.static next to the file or the path to the folder that you want to serve. And then on top of that, we can do app.use, everything else, express.static. Oh, I know why it's not giving me stuff. It's because we have express here, and we haven't required express yet. So when we do express.static, dir name plus down to directories to public, which currently we don't have a public, but we can fix that in just a moment. I also want to do that redirect false, just to be extra sure. And finally, since with single page applications we need to serve up the index.html if it can't find a file at that route, we're going to do app.all, and just for good measure we're going to do asterisk again. And we're actually going to do rec res, and here we're going to do res.send file, and what it's going to be is it's going to be a path, or personally what I do is I do an index.html, and then in the configuration it doesn't say. In the configuration we're going to say root is dir name plus back a couple folders to public, because the index.html will live in the public folder. Since this isn't express.static, we're not needing to do the redirect because it's only going to serve up that file every single time we get that. And for that matter, what it will enable us to do is that the front end can then take any incorrect path that they're trying to redirect to, and then serve up or send a 404 page instead.
What kind of how would that happen? What kind of an instance would that happen?
The 404? Like for instance, if you have your main application and then you try to go to a random route, just like, for instance, if you don't have a route foo, which you probably won't, then if you try to do your host name /foo, it will automatically redirect to 404 because you, in your front-end settings, have done it for 404.
So this is like typing in the URL specifically?
Typing in the URL, yeah. And again, like, the reason why we do this is because of the fact that when you go to your main route and then you try to go to a known path that you have, like users, to see a list of users, if you just try to route to that with the normal express.static that we have up here, there is no file there that is users. So it gets confused and then it throws a 404 instead of actually gives you what you want. As such, in that case, we're going to take all requests that don't match anything at all at this point. This is going to be at the very end of all of our routes. It's going to send the HTML file instead of anything else. And again, that's part of the reason why we have this api.router.js, is that in the case that it goes to, let's go back to delegator. I'm going to grab file router instead and file.router. And since it's a function, we pass the app into that. Anyway, but because we have anything going to /API going to our API, we can, that's why we did this error handling, because that way anything that goes to the API route that doesn't match anything automatically gets a 404, rather than the index.html, which is really confusing. So yeah. Unfortunately, I don't really have much of a front-end application in this case to really show, but just for fun, let's at least do a public folder. Inside of the public folder, let's just create a simple index.html. And let's use our friend Emmett to load, apparently, when it comes up. Any second now. Tab, that way, to make this a million times easier. I'm going to format it because I don't like the way that it automatically formats it. And just for fun, we're just going to have hello world, because that is the most stereotypical thing to do. Anyway. So now that we have it this way, this should work the way that we want it to. And just so that we don't do anything here. By the way, we would also, in the API router, since that's where we would want to do stuff with our database, we'd also want to get the massive.config.js, the function, to be able to get the instance, get DB instance, and then we can use them in here somewhere. Like either just doing that straight on top of it, or do something like that. Just so that we get something back, I'm just going to do a res.send name Kyle. I don't really know age, because that is also a very normal thing to have happen. Age is going to be 45, and that will just be send. Post is going to be res.send name Mary, age 37, and res.send name Izzo, age 13. I don't know. So yeah, the reason why I'm doing that isn't so that we can test out these endpoints to see if they work. Slash, and so that we can see that they work as opposed to anything else. So, for fun, let's close our Node app and then run it again. See if we did everything right, because live coding is going to fail, usually. Buffering. It's also taking a little bit longer for me because I'm also running a recording behind the scenes. Anyway, so first of all, we see that our app is running at localhost 8084. So let's open up a browser to that. Localhost, as long as you're running it, you'll see it. When we run it, buffering. There we go. We see hello world, which is what we wanted. Now, for fun, let's go to Postman. Let's create a new request. First of all, in our Express app, the API router, we did get user ID. So, localhost 8084. We're going to do API because we need to do API. User, and then some random ID. When we get back is Kyle, age 45. We next post to register, API/register, remember. And can I make this any bigger? Ooh. Okay, I'm just gonna make that full screen. And make it bigger. Okay. So let's post to API register. We get back Mary, age 37. And finally, let's do user/45 with a delete request. We'll send that. We get back Rizzo, age 13. Now, to test to make sure that any random API endpoint that does not match those will fail, this resource doesn't exist. False. This is just a good fall through, everything like that. It doesn't exist. 404, we can see over here that 404 not found. It's behaving exactly like we want it to. And you can see now in our console, because we did that here in the bottom of our API.all, API router.all, we also did a console log chalk.read. And just for fun, I'm going to also do a plus rec dot original URL.
At Logical, do you mostly do backend or do you both?
I do front end mainly because Logical is PHP. And so if I go in and cancel that, and then run it again, after it takes forever to do it, then what we can do, or then what we can see when we run this again, provided that it actually finishes, there we go. We get the exact same response here, but we also see that the API, the route that they're trying to reach was /API and nothing else. So, in essence, that is how I personally like to split up my NodeJS servers, because that way we can keep things clean, we can keep things separate, and we can make sure that our server, I'm losing it because I'm tired and running out of energy. We can make sure that our server we will know where to go when things go wrong on our server. So yeah.
Are you gonna put this as like are you gonna put this on your GitHub, or are you gonna?
I'm going to put this on my GitHub as the solution. So I'm going to actually, right now, create a new branch. Solution. And almost, there you go. Origin. So now you can get a hold of the stuff that I did here as a solution to it from the same GitHub repo. Actually, it's not there yet. There it is. So yeah, I'll be updating this probably with a TypeScript version because I like TypeScript so much. And if you want to talk a little bit more about TypeScript, I'll do that off of the recording, especially since if you notice down here, I am getting low on battery, and the recording is not helping, nor is the projector or anything. So, in any case, that is it. Are there any questions before I finish? Most of it's probably mind-blowing, so it's not going to be something that you're like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to ask. So, if you have any questions about this, feel free to either put in an issue on GitHub on the repo. That's actually a really good way to make sure that Slack amnesia doesn't get a hold of it, or send me a message on Slack. Sounds good. Thanks for coming.